You're listening to Secrets for Scaling, a Gecko Board podcast that explores the growth secrets of successful founders and CEOs. Whether you're just launching your business or taking your company to the next level, you'll learn proven strategies and tactics for growing a sustainable business. For this episode, we talked to Matt Munson, co-founder and CEO of Twenty20. Welcome, Matt. First and foremost, to kick things off, can you tell us a bit about what Twenty20 is?
Yes, at Twenty20 we provide stock photography that doesn't suck. What we do is we source authentic real-world imagery from a massive global community of mobile photographers. We've built out the largest image catalog of our kind in the world. We've got about 50 million images, so similarly sized to someone like a Shutterstock or an iStock photo. But we provide all real-world authentic content. And we have customers, thousands of customers, ranging from like Google, Uber, Birchbox to a lot of the leading design and advertising agencies in the world who are looking for a more authentic, real-world alternative to traditional stock photography.
So starting in 2012, you raised $1.2 million for capital for a different business, InstaCanvas, a product turning people's Instagram images into canvas prints. Was that your first business?
No, and in fact, it wasn't even the first iteration of this business. I've been fortunate to be working in startups most of my career. My prior businesses were more in the ad tech and kind of traditional e-commerce space. This company actually started as an education company, believe it or not, in early 2012. And our very first product was a product called Acceptly. That was a digital college admissions counselor. I'll spare you the details, but we spent about 8 months in the education space, launched 6 or 7 different products, really had a hard time figuring it out, and hit a point where we had raised a little bit of capital, probably about $500,000, mostly for a bunch of angels. Hit a point where we had probably 60 or 90 days of cash left. We were a small team. We were 5 people, but we were pretty exhausted with the education space. And we were testing a bunch of different ideas, and the kind of screening mechanism that we were using was we wanted to find a business where we could really engineer acquisition into the product. We'd realized that while in our prior business we had relied a lot on paid search and paid acquisition, getting something off the ground in 2012, it was just kind of a different world. And the Facebook had really opened up as an acquisition channel, and some of the other social networks. So we were looking for ideas where we could bring together something we were passionate about with a kind of more viral acquisition channel. And we needed to make money right away because we were running out of it. One of my co-founders was a great photographer and had sold a couple of his photos before. And one morning, Kevin, my co-founder and our creative director, walked in and said, "Hey, remember when you bought one of my photos to hang in your apartment? I bet other people would do that." And it was kind of just a fun idea to start, but we realized it really fit that criteria of potentially building acquisition into the model, because we looked at what was happening in mobile photography, and you had more people than ever before getting access to photography, creating an incredible amount of valuable content. So over 2 billion images a day are created on mobile devices. And these people also had really profound social reach. So networks like Instagram and Twitter and Facebook meant that they could not only create great content, but also share it out to the world. And so InstaCanvas, our first product in the photography space, was a pretty simple product that let you sign up, create an online gallery to sell your mostly your Instagram photos and later all mobile photos. And then what we would do is we would turn them into canvas prints and other physical products, and your friends, family, and followers could come and shop your gallery and order products that would be shipped to their home. So that's how we got started with InstaCanvas.
So was it just the 3 of you at the time?
There were 4 of us at the time, and we were going through an incubator here in LA. So we were in the Mucker Lab incubator. The first iteration of InstaCanvas, I mean, it's a crazy story, but we had this conversation on a Friday morning over breakfast. We had gotten really into lean startup methodology, which really helped us. So the conversation we had was, what are the underlying risks of this business? And some of the ones that we identified were, do people really want to sell their photos? Is there any market amongst their followers for actually buying them? What is this thesis that we have around the photographers driving social reach and driving traffic and awareness? Is that real? And so that Friday afternoon, we actually built version 1 in like 4 or 5 hours. It was a very simple 4 static page website. You were basically told you were being put on a waiting list and encouraged to invite your followers. And the hook was, we're going to be launching in a few weeks, and the top requested galleries will be featured on the homepage at launch. And crazy enough, that's where we started. It was just basically testing. Does anyone care about selling their photos? Will they market this service to their followers? And then will we see any signal amongst followers of an interest in coming and buying? And we were kind of hoping to sign like 20 users sign up 20 users that weekend. That was our proof threshold for, is there any signal here? And we basically went out and manually invited like 10 Instagram users just by posting on their galleries. And then we went home for the weekend and we started texting each other a few hours later, and we're just watching the social feeds. Like, the thing just blew up over the weekend. So we signed like 5,000 users the first weekend, and realized that we had really tapped into a lot of interest among mobile photographers. So people that had gotten into photography when they got their first iPhone and were using Instagram or Flickr or whatever, but had never thought about this idea of taking their photography hobby to the next level and actually creating more of a professional gallery and selling their images to people. And there was a huge amount of interest and a huge willingness to market the service. And so that's where we started. And I think we had like 6 weeks left before demo day. We built the rest of the service. We found a printing partner that would allow us to manufacture and ship canvases to start. And by the time we got to our demo day 6 weeks later, we were early, but we probably had 40,000 users, and we're doing our first, I don't remember, 20 or 30,000 a month in revenue. So it was a crazy story where we had kind of banged our heads against the wall for 8 months in the education space and launched a few other products in that testing phase. And then kind of in a bit of a lucky strike on a Friday, found something that really struck the imagination of a lot of people.
It must have been really rewarding to have your hypothesis of the built-in acquisition model be validated too so quickly.
Yeah, I mean, quickly, yes and no, right? I mean, this is probably like our 30th test over the course of that year. So it's one of those stories that was an overnight success, but then overnight success only after 200 nights of banging our heads against the wall, just trying stuff and also learning. It was that team. Some of us had worked together before, but in many ways it was a new team, and we were employing a new method of exploration around lean startup. And it took us some time to really learn how to run these kind of fast iterative tests. But it was a lot of fun. It was a great place to start. It was the beginning of us finding a lot of signal, but it's also been a pretty crazy journey since then to find our way to a real sustainable, scalable business. So this stuff never gets easy.
So what were some of the biggest challenges you faced after demo day, after launch?
Well, we were fortunate that at that time, fundraising was fairly straightforward. It was a seed round and first round capital and founder fund, seed fund, and a few others came in. So fundraising hasn't been easy always for us, but that was fortunately a fairly straightforward round. So we found ourselves with a little bit of capital in the bank and running a brand new product. Things that were early challenges back then, the main question for us was, how do we take this early signal that we have around the growth of a community and build it into something that shows real sustainable growth? So we always had this nice viral top of funnel activity where we were continually getting new users into the system. But we had big challenges around retaining those users. So it was very transactional in the beginning. People would just sign up and sell a few photos to their friends or family that came in. And there also was really no sense of a community or any reason to really stick around beyond having your storefront. And so that first year for us was really figuring out, what does this product grow into that gives ongoing value to our user base? And what's our thesis for building a kind of longer term sustainable business out of this?
So how do you find the answers to those questions?
Well, in the end, we only found an answer to one of them, which is part of the kind of the next pivot story. But we spent about a year working on that InstaCanvas product, and it's on the initial vision. What we cracked on the retention side was really around the community that we've now built out. So we had this key, and I'm going to tell you the big stuff that worked and failed, but we tested a lot of things, and a lot of things failed. But one thesis we had is we spent a lot of time talking to our photographers. We learned that for them, places like Instagram and before that Flickr, in the early days, they loved that experience because it felt like this creative community where people that were into mobile photography or photography in general had discovered it, and they were sharing the work that they were creating. There was a real sense of community and inspiration and encouragement. But Instagram wasn't really designed to be a community for creators. I mean, it's a great platform, an incredible platform, but it's really kind of mobile photo sharing for the masses, and it serves that very well. What we learned was, what our thesis became was, what if we created a community that was really aimed at this generation of photographers that were discovering photography on mobile, creating beautiful, inspiring content, and wanted a place to hone their craft and create amongst fellow creators. And that's what we started to build. So if you use our app today, you discover a community that's really aimed at creative, artistic mobile photographers that are capturing the world around them and that are interested in honing their craft, being a part of a community, and building an audience for their creative work. And so the entire thing is designed less like a traditional social network and more like a beautiful place to discover content where the best content kind of bubbles to the top and helps creators to build an audience in a more organic way. So that was how we solved the retention piece, and we found that we were able to build a large and sustained community. We're now over 250,000 photographers in over 120 countries. The piece of building a sustained business, to be honest, we never really got to. It was a crazy start. The product grew from 0 to about $1 million in annual revenue in 4 or 5 months. And then it kind of plateaued, and we spent another 8 or 9 months trying to figure out how to really become a place that people would come on a regular basis and purchase gifts or decor items. And to be honest, we never quite got there. And we found that we were building this massive catalog of valuable content. We were building this big community. And in the end, while our mission was to help this generation of photographers build an audience and create opportunity for their craft, we found that we weren't really able to deliver that on the consumer to consumer model where we started. And that's when we really started to explore where else we should look. And we started to, through a couple of fortuitous conversations, start looking at the stock photography market and realize that this was a very, very large and fast-growing market where there hadn't been a lot of innovation and where people were using sites like Shutterstock and Getty and iStock Photo and pretty unhappy with the experiences they were having because the content was staged and stocky and all the same everywhere they looked. And here we were sitting on, at the time, a 30 million image catalog of incredible, vibrant, real-world content. And we started to have a few conversations with big buyers of stock photography, and a light bulb went off, and we realized that the much larger opportunity to achieve our mission had been sitting in front of us all along, but was kind of a pivot away, and we started looking at the B2B licensing business.
So at this point, you have this huge engaged community, and you spotted an opportunity that could be a real business. What happened next?
So we were in another pretty challenging position. We were getting low on cash. We probably had 4 or 5 months of cash left. Realized that moving to digital licensing was going to be a little bit of a Hail Mary move for us as a business. And we sat down with the team and talked about the reasons why we thought it was interesting. We'd done a little early testing, so we had done a little bit of like cold calling and talking to companies in the area in LA who license content. And we had probably gotten 20 customers to kind of sign up as alpha customers. I mean, there was no service, right? There was just this website for ordering canvas prints. And if I recall, we gave them some kind of like back-end hacky access to basically sign in and license photos, but there was no engine for that. I mean, there was no piping for that. But we had a little proof, so we knew that people would use the service. Major issues with like search and discovery. I mean, we had 30 million images, a similar size to Shutterstock at the time. So you can imagine the content, the search and discovery challenges. But we started there, and we sat down with the team and said, look, we think this is where the future is. There's a lot of unknowns. We're running out of money. But we think there's a move here to save the business and potentially start exploring a really big market opportunity. And we kind of went all in. So in probably 30 days, we rebranded the company from InstaCanvas to 2020. We did a bunch of customer development with photographers to understand their willingness and interest in selling their content to businesses or brands instead of to their friends. And we got a really positive response there. And that was initially customer interviews and then more surveys and product announcements. We began the effort of kind of solidifying some of those customer relationships. So we had actual agreements in place with 20 or 30 customers to license content on that early alpha service, and then a longer commitment as we built out an actual licensing service. And then with very little money left in the bank, we went out and tried to raise a Series A, basically on this belief that we could take our massive photographer community and image catalog and build out a stock licensing service and go directly after Shutterstock, iStock, Getty. And fortunately, found the capital markets to be very receptive to that story. I think there was a lot of interest in digital marketplaces at the time. The stock licensing business was really big and hadn't really been disrupted in some time. And we had, most marketplaces, you have that chicken and the egg problem where you're trying to solve either supply or demand so that you can bring the other. And we had dramatically oversolved supply. And so we're able to get a handful of great investors interested in this experiment of building out the actual service and trying to go and scale something. So we raised an $8 million Series A with Canaan Partners in April of 2014. And then started the hard work of actually building out a licensing service.
So in your article, you talk about after you guys raised the $8 million, which is awesome, that you burnt through the cash pretty quickly. What happened there?
Well, it wasn't that quickly, but we did burn through it. So we spent the latter half of 2014 really building the first version of the licensing service, which ended up being a lot harder than we anticipated, but we figured that out, and we ended up publicly launching it in February of 2015. So this is almost 2 years ago. That the first few months there was a lot of the early market validation stuff around doing a lot of customer development, getting to a thesis on who the early adopters would be, thinking about early acquisition channels and doing things like cold calling creative directors inside design agencies and playing with some cold emailing and other tactics. And by probably May or June, so a few months in, we had our first 20 customers or so, and we had a pretty clear understanding of how to build an acquisition funnel. So we had a few marketing channels that were working to drive leads. We had done some experimentation with the founding operating team around an inside sales model where we were talking to prospects on the phone and signing them up to contracts. We hired our first couple of salespeople and found that we could pretty quickly get our new salespeople up to substantial revenue. So we had our first 2 new salespeople in and booking, I don't remember the exact numbers, $30K a month or so by July, and started to feel like we had the early makings of a pretty scalable marketing to inside sales funnel. And what I talk a lot about in the article is in the back of our minds was a tremendous amount of pressure to prove this out and begin to grow it quickly. So we'd raised a lot of money at a pretty lofty valuation. We felt that we were sitting on a big market opportunity to build a marketplace that would really disrupt the stock photography market, and where we had this great supply side. So starting with me as the founding CEO, we as I look back, we had probably more pressure than we needed we put on ourselves more pressure than was necessary to scale fast, but we started to grow really quickly from there. So we went from our first 2 salespeople to probably 20 by the end of that year. And our plan at the time was to raise a Series B in Q1 of this year, 2016. So we were really basically aggressively chasing that early scale and going from, I think we went from 10 or 20 customers in July to 100 by the end of the year. And what we found, and I guess just to fill out the story, since you asked about the 8 million or the 10 million that we talk about in the article, in the beginning of 2016, we were seeing incredible validation on this inside sales model. So really a dream scenario. We were bringing young people in off the street who were a year out of college, training them as SDRs. They were getting up to targets in their first 30 days and then getting promoted up to AE within 90 days. Our account executives were booking 25 to 35K a month and all in prepaid annual contracts. So the sales effort was generating a ton of cash. And we really aggressively built out the business. So we went from that 10-person team that I mentioned earlier to 55 people in kind of April, May of this year. And that sales team went from 10 in January to 35 in April. And as I look back, so we had great validation on the acquisition model, but we went really too fast to scale. And what we found was in April, things just really started to break. So first, funding was hard. We went out to raise in January of this year, which basically was a funding apocalypse, which we didn't know nobody knew at the time. But we were out with great growth numbers, early revenue and a big valuation, but pretty profound kind of cash generation. Like very few companies kind of see that at that stage. And so we had a great story, but really had trouble raising like almost everybody did in Q1. And sat with the board and decided, look, like we're generating so much cash, let's just go all in on getting the company profitable, or at least holding off on an outside round for the next year. And let's keep doubling down on this route. And in April, the wheels just kind of fell off. So our leads started to dry up. Our sales team bookings got cut by 70% from March to April. And we ended up in this spot where, we had been burning like 200K a month as a company, which is a, reasonable burn for a 55-person company, Series A. And all of a sudden, April, May, we're burning 500, 600,000 a month. And our runway goes from looking, quasi-infinite to 6 months, something crazy like that. And it was just, we've written a lot about it now. I've written about it. Our head of growth published a great article a couple days ago. So we've kind of been pretty open about it, but it was just stressful as fuck. And we started to kind of peel back the layers and try to understand where, what's gone wrong. That's where things started to fall apart, and that kind of brings you up to speed through April, May of this year.
What parts of that acquisition model did you find most successful?
So at the time when it was working, specializing parts of the funnel were really important to us. So we had a growth team, we call them a growth team, that was really focused on just generating leads for the sales team. So they were looking across channels like content marketing, search, paid advertising, referral programs, cold email, and their entire job was to generate leads. And we really built a testing factory there where they were testing a variety of early channels, and then they were pushing for scale on the ones where we saw signal, and then in charge of scaling those out to support the team. And then the sales team itself was very specialized. So I mentioned we had SDRs and AEs in dedicated roles. And we grew to a point where we had even broke that apart farther, so that we had specialists based on where the channel that the lead was coming from. And that worked very well for us. In the Medium article, we talk a lot about what went wrong. But the things that went right, where we were able to scale a sales team that quickly and cash that quickly, there were some things that went very, very right for us. And specializing was a big one for us. Another thing that went well for us was training our own people. So we did some experimentation early on with hiring in experienced account executives from other SaaS companies or other B2B companies. And we had much more success bringing in people that came in with no training, but were smart and driven, well-educated, and came in with no dogma and a high willingness to learn. And that was a profound learning for us. So we were able to bring people up to speed much more quickly who came in with no prior sales experience.
As you were refining these marketing and sales strategies and figuring out what worked, what were you using to measure the success and to track that?
We had an entire stack at the time. So we were using tools like HubSpot, Close.io, a lot of stuff we built internally. So we use RJ Metrics on top of our internal database, our internal databases. But we really applied this kind of growth methodology to the whole thing. So we were tracking customers from the first touch point all the way through to close and upgrade or churn and referral customer status. And we were able to do that across the business and on a per rep basis. So we had a pretty solid understanding of the system. There were a few things we didn't have that ultimately led to all of that breaking down. But those were some of the things that worked well.
That gets to my next question. What broke at that point?
Yeah, let's talk about the good stuff.
Yeah.
And this is part of the reason we started blogging about this stuff, is I feel like everybody talks about what goes right and nobody talks about what goes wrong. And so much of life in startups and just life in general, right, is like shit happens and stuff breaks. And so we decided, forget it. Let's just start normalizing this stuff and let's talk about it and let's put it out there. So what broke? So we were growing so quickly. We had, I'll talk about the systems things and then I'll talk about the human things. I think the human things are more interesting, but systems, we underinvested in our sales systems early on. So I mentioned, the stack that we were on. We didn't have the systems in place to go from 10 people to 50 people in 6 months. And building those systems and getting it right takes time. And it takes time that you need when you're thinking only about foundation and not about scale. And we didn't take that time. So by the time that we had gone from 10 to 30, the tools that we were using to measure reps and to manage leads started to break down. So that was one. We underinvested in the diversification of our leads channels as we started to scale. So there was so much pressure for scale that the attention of our growth team shifted from channel testing and validation to only scaling channels that had shown early signal. And that worked great as long as they worked. But when our top 2 channels showed signs of breaking, we had to go all the way back to the beginning to test new things. And that faltering had ramifications across the business, from cash management to team morale. So underinvesting in systems, underinvesting in diversification of leads channels. And then on the human side, in hindsight, we had challenges with sales leadership. We had great people, but I would say we underinvested on the leadership side. So at one point, we promoted up one of our best AEs to running the team. We did it with an eye toward it being temporary, and we were in the midst of fundraising, and we just needed someone to kind of own it and get it done. And he bravely stepped up and did some incredible work. But we really under-resourced him and the team in that we didn't bring in anyone else that had more experience in building out the systems or building out kind of the discipline side of sales culture. So while we had really strong people, I would say we're under-investing in training and under-investing in kind of guidelines or handrails that sometimes, particularly a young, less experienced sales team, could really benefit from. And that created a pretty perfect storm by April and May. The systems breakdown, the leadership breakdown, and the cash implications of the bookings dropping created a kind of perfect storm for sleepless nights and some difficult discussions for the entire company, and particularly the leadership team and the board.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot in the startup world. There seems to be people get promoted to manager because they're so good at their job, but don't have any experience managing or don't receive those resources. I think that's really common in the tech industry in general.
Yeah, I think it is. And this is, you mentioned it earlier, but something that we've really internalized in the last year at 2020 is a belief that sometimes you do need to slow down in order to go fast. And I mentioned this in the article. I just love the analogy. I'm very fortunate to work with Jerry Colonna as a CEO coach, and he's been a profound resource in the last year as we've gone through all of this. But one of the things that he just beats into my head is boxers train in this concept of moving slowly and planning carefully in order to strike fast. And I think this is something that we miss in startup land a lot. We talk a lot about speed and move fast and break things and all of this ideology around velocity, which certainly has its place. And, we do want to arrive at a place where we've made as much world impact as possible in the limited time we have. So that requires velocity. But I think what we fail to talk about a lot is foundation building and mirroring blind spots. And as I look back in the last couple of years here, and this is true for other businesses that I advise or work closely with, when you look at the past, the things that prevented success, it's almost never you didn't work enough hours, you didn't ship enough code, you didn't make enough sales calls. It's almost never those things. It's always the thing that came from your side view and got you where you least expected it, right? Like something broke. You had a culture issue that resulted in people leaving or getting discouraged. You had some macroeconomic issue. You failed for too long to see the shift in your acquisition strategy or the next the next kind of market that you should move into with your product. And so moving fast in the wrong direction or moving fast when you don't see an iceberg coming at you just is a fool's errand. And so we've made a very massive shift inside 2020, and this is what we've started also to write a lot about, because I think people don't talk about this often enough. But we've shifted to a belief that one of our primary jobs is to create headspace, clarity, wellness for our team. Across the team. And this is a leadership thing. This is a board thing, but we believe a lot in high impact work across the team, which means you've got an entire team of people that are making big decisions and thinking strategically. But if we're always rushing them and creating a culture of anxiety and weariness for the sake of speed, you end up with people that aren't thinking clearly, and you hit icebergs. And so, I think when it comes to whether it's someone's career development and thinking about resourcing them, or just helping someone think about the way they work week to week, our perspective has shifted a lot to slowing down, making sure the path is clear, and still very focused on learning quickly. And that's where we put the emphasis of velocity is on learning. but doing it from a place of clarity, thoughtfulness, and making sure that we're taking time to look for blind spots and look for opportunities on the horizon that maybe we're not seeing in the midst of the day-to-day grind.
How do you get there? Is there a trick to finding that clarity that you'd suggest to other founders?
Well, sadly, there's no trick, and this isn't a binary thing, right? So it's not like we woke up in July and all of a sudden had a permanent sense of clarity or cultural health. But I can say that we've made some substantive moves to help maintain a culture of well-being and clarity. I think it starts with the leaders. So I myself, I have a coach that I work with to help mirror blind spots. I have a therapist that I see once a week to help me deal with the anxieties, ups and downs of leading a startup and in life in general. We talk a lot about these things openly as a team. One thing that we do that is a great way to bring humanity and space into the workplace. We start most of our meetings with a red, green, yellow check-in where people are invited just to share kind of how they're doing, what's going on. So if you're green, I'm here, ready to go. Yellow, I'm here, but there's something kind of on my mind bothering me. Maybe we're late shipping some feature or had a fight with my partner or whatever. I'm red, my kid's in the hospital, or had a huge fight with my partner before walking in this morning, or having a big issue with a coworker or whatever. So we've begun to create space in the workplace for people to kind of be themselves and share what's going on. And if they want to talk about it, great. And if not, that's fine. And we've also started to make this part of our conversation as a team. So we had our end of quarter team offsite this week, and it was a 2-day offsite, and we probably spent half the time talking about the business and the market and the tactical stuff, which is great and obviously very important. But we also spent half the time talking about the way we work as a team and what we need to change in this business in 2017 to make this a place that we want to spend the next 3 to 5 years working. And opening up that question in a startup is, I think, very rare, but it's also very powerful. And people they start talking about things like what they need in their role in order to feel like they can transition between their home life and their work life, what they need to feel more connected with their team members. So we try to just open up these conversations. And I guess the last thing we do that is more common is really trying to simplify down the things that really matter. And test on those much, much earlier, which is something, if you go all the way back to our early days, and this is kind of the ironic thing about that year of chaos for us, is we know better. We come from lean startup methodology, and we have it in our DNA to test early and often, but it's easy to lose track of that when you're just thinking speed for the sake of speed. And so we've started to talk a lot about the balance of sustainability and growth, and looking at those two things as two sides of part of the same coin instead of as trade-offs. And encourage in our planning, we've encouraged people to strip down what needs to be done to really the one or two things that are really critical. And then all of our communication week to week is about learnings on those key things, so that we're really practicing what we preach, where we're talking more and more about the learnings and the growth as an after effect of that. And it's been a really powerful move for us.
Is that how you keep the team focused on those one or two things, by making sure you're constantly communicating about them? Or are there any other ways you keep them focused?
There's a bunch of things we do. It really comes down to orienting the entire effort around the few things that matter and the learnings around those things. And then always, having all conversations involve both learnings and progress, and then well-being of the team. But some of the tactical stuff we do just to share. So you walk into our office, and the the key results that we're measuring around the current focus areas or on the big screens inside the office. We use a tool called Lattice we call them rocks. Some people call them OKRs, but we use a cool tool called Lattice to do team updates on rocks. So in real time each week, we're posting learnings in there that auto post across Slack so that there's this kind of constant flow of learnings around the key areas. And then the last thing that we do that is tactical, but was really helpful to me is we have an accountabilities list. So we break everything that the company does into an accountability or a rock. And accountabilities are basically the things we do to keep the business afloat and moving forward. So things like checking the mail and paying the bills and making the Wi-Fi work, directing customer development call organization. So those are accountabilities. Everybody knows who's in charge of what, and that creates focus and clarity there. And then we have rocks, our version of OKRs, where each one has an owner, and those are reported in on each week. And that combination has been really powerful for us to create clarity, ownership, and collaboration.
You've written a bit about founder stress and depression. I think that's obviously a very serious topic that's just been kind of recently brought to light in the mainstream. What advice do you have for founders who begin to experience these inevitable feelings of stress and anxiety as they're starting and growing their company?
Well, first, I think that's almost all founders and probably almost all people that are in high influence roles anywhere, but definitely in startups where there's such an environment of uncertainty. So one, this is not a minority thing. This is not a you alone thing. And I think it's just kind of bullshit that no one talks about this. And we talk about resourcing companies, but we never talk about resourcing people. And that is just terrible. So advice that I have, you're entirely not alone. So stop dealing with it alone. Opening up this conversation to the people around you. We're all dealing with this shit. And your courage in beginning to talk about it will allow other people to do the same, and will also allow you to be less alone in the ups and downs. Therapy is incredible. I will probably go to therapy my entire life. I think it's one of the most powerful ways for learning about yourself. Having a mirror on your life, it's just a way to check in on yourself, how you're doing. I've seen the same therapist for probably 4 or 5 years now, and I hope to see her for as long as she'll have me. It allows her to know my story, my values, my strengths and weaknesses. So she's able to mirror back to me things that I'm just not seeing week to week. Really powerful. If you have the opportunity if you're working with an executive coach, can be a very effective way to resource yourself in dealing with the stresses of leadership and uncertainty inside of startups. And I think the last thing, and this is more just a community thing, but I think for all of us to think about how to build real human sustainability into our companies and into the startup ecosystem is really important. And it's an opportunity for us to have a much bigger world impact than we already are, because it's really to our detriment that we allow ourselves and our people to suffer and to be overwhelmed by anxiety, depression, fear, loneliness. And these things are so common inside of our companies, inside of these high performance, high stress, high anxiety environments that we create. So if we can find a way to reduce that, to normalize it, to get people talking about it, it's going to make the impact that we want to have far bigger. And we can do it in a way where the workplace becomes a place of self-learning and a place where people really grow and become more themselves instead of less themselves, and healthier, happier, healthier families. We can turn our startups into a place that have a positive world impact that's a lot bigger than our customers being happy or our investors seeing returns.
It's a great outlook. I love that. It's awesome.
Yeah, sorry to be long-winded. You could tell this is an area that is deeply personal to me, and a really, really core to the work that we're trying to do here at 2020.
Oh, yeah. I'm so glad you shared. I think these things need to be said. And like you said, it's a little bit ridiculous. People don't talk about it more. So definitely appreciate you sharing.
Yeah, absolutely. I appreciate you asking the question, Shannon.
Thank you so much for joining us. This has been a really great conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you for listening to Gecko Board's Secrets for Scaling podcast. Hope to catch you next time.